I built a world so powerful that no one dared to question me until a little girl did, and in 5 words, she destroyed everything I thought I knew about myself. I spent years convincing myself that loneliness was the price of greatness, that success demanded silence, distance, and a heart made of stone. I built my empire brick by brick, every deal, every dollar, every sleepless night stacked neatly into a wall high enough to keep feelings out. People bowed when I entered a room, smiled when I raised a hand, and vanished when I no longer needed them. Power gave me control, and control gave me comfort. Or at least, that's what I told myself. But comfort is a strange illusion. It doesn't fill you, it numbs you. It was the kind of comfort that felt like drowning slowly in gold. My mornings were mechanical, precise, predictable, luxury wrapped around emptiness. The city below my penthouse stretched endlessly, a shimmering kingdom of light and ambition. And yet all I could see in those glass reflections was a man growing older and colder by the day. I would watch the sunrise through tinted windows, sipping coffee that tasted like burnt routine, and wonder when exactly my life had stopped feeling alive. That morning began no differently until fate, disguised as a rainstorm, decided to remind me that no amount of wealth can silence destiny when it wants to speak. The rain came heavy, relentless, turning the streets of New York into rivers of reflection. From the warmth of my leather seat, I watched people scatter under umbrellas like ants fleeing floodwater. The driver asked if we should wait it out, but I told him to keep driving. Deals didn't pause for weather, and neither did I. But then the car slowed. Out of the blur of rain, I noticed a small figure on the corner of Lexington Avenue, a child standing alone in the storm. She couldn't have been more than 9, maybe 10, her coat far too thin for the cold, her hair plastered to her forehead, her hands clutching what looked like a bundle of papers. Everyone rushed past her, ignoring her existence, and for a moment I almost did too. Almost. I told the driver to stop. He hesitated. Billionaires don't stop for children selling things on the street. But something in the way she stood, unmoving, patient against the cruelty of weather, made me curious in a way I hadn't been in years. When I stepped out, the rain sliced through my coat and crawled under my collar, cold and real. A shock I hadn't felt in a long time. She looked up when I approached, eyes wide but unafraid, eyes that held the kind of innocence that the world tries to steal too soon. "Are you selling something?" I asked, my voice low, trying not to sound like the stranger I was. She nodded, lifting a stack of handmade cards from a plastic bag. "Mother's Day cards, sir," she said, her voice soft but practiced, the kind that had repeated the same line too many times to too many indifferent people. I took one. It was a small piece of folded paper, edges uneven, the kind of imperfection only children create with love. On it, drawn in red crayon, was a crooked heart surrounded by stick figures, a woman and a child holding hands. Underneath, in careful handwriting, were the words, "Happy Mother's Day." For a moment I didn't know what to say. My world was made of contracts and control. There was no room for innocence there. "You made these yourself?" I asked. She nodded proudly. "Yes, sir." "Are you selling them for your mom?" Her eyes flickered and her voice softened. "No, sir. I'm selling them for everyone else's." Something shifted in me. A tiny fracture in the stone I'd spent years polishing over my heart. I had heard tragic stories before. I had read about pain from the safety of my penthouse, seen poverty from the tinted windows of my cars. But this was different. This was real, standing in front of me, soaked and shivering but still trying to smile. "Where's your mom?" I asked quietly. She hesitated, then answered with the kind of calm that only comes from heartbreak too old for her age. "She's in heaven. I'm saving to buy her flowers." The words hit me like a punch I didn't see coming. I tried to swallow the sudden tightness in my throat, tried to hide the discomfort I felt at being powerless for once. I reached for my wallet. desperate to do something, anything that would make the ache in my chest stop. "How much for all of them?" I asked. She blinked up at me. "All of them?" "Yes," I said, trying to sound casual. "I'll take every card you have. You shouldn't be out here in the rain." She shook her head gently, her wet hair clinging to her cheeks. "You can buy them," she said, her voice quiet but steady. "But you can't buy what I really want." I frowned. "And what's that?" She looked at me then, and for the first time in my adult life, I felt seen. Not as a man of wealth, not as a name in headlines, but as someone she was asking for something human. Her lips trembled slightly as she whispered the words that would change my life forever. "Will you be my mom for one day?" It didn't make sense at first. The question hung in the air like smoke, fragile but heavy. I stared at her, waiting for her to laugh, to say she was joking, but she didn't. She simply stood there, soaked, tiny hands holding her cards, looking at me with eyes that didn't know the meaning of manipulation. In my world, people asked for money, favors, opportunities, but never this. Never something that simple, that pure, that impossible. For a moment, I forgot how to breathe. The sound of rain softened, the city blurred, and all I could see was this little girl asking for something no amount of power could give. My throat closed up as I tried to respond, but nothing came out. I wasn't equipped for this kind of truth. She must have seen the confusion on my face because she smiled. Not sadly, not bitterly, but with a softness that made it worse. "That's okay," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe next time." Then she turned away, walking into the rain, her tiny shoes splashing through puddles as the storm swallowed her silhouette. I wanted to stop her. I wanted to call out, to tell her I didn't mean to stay silent, that I didn't know how to say yes. But by the time I found my voice, she was gone. I stood there like a man frozen in a life he didn't recognize, the rain soaking through layers of designer fabric and ego until it reached skin. The city around me moved on, as if nothing had happened. But something inside me cracked open. Back in the car, I sat in silence, staring at the handmade card still in my hand. The heart was bleeding red from the rain. The words, "Happy Mother's Day," almost erased. And yet I couldn't bring myself to let it go. That fragile piece of paper felt heavier than everything I'd ever built. That night, I couldn't sleep. The city outside glittered like it always did, but for the first time, it didn't comfort me. The wealth, the skyline, the silence, it all felt meaningless. I poured myself a drink I didn't want and stared at my reflection in the window. The man staring back wasn't untouchable anymore. He looked haunted. When I finally closed my eyes, her voice came back to me, small, steady, and piercing. "Will you be my mom for one day?" I woke before dawn, heart racing, the echo still trapped inside my head. I told myself it was nothing, just a strange encounter with a lost child. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. Because there was something about that question that didn't feel random at all. It felt like the beginning of something I wasn't ready for, but couldn't avoid. I thought I'd forget her by tomorrow, but tomorrow remembered her before I even opened my eyes. Her voice became the only thing louder than my silence. That night, the city refused to sleep, and neither did I. Even from the 39th floor of my penthouse, I could still hear the storm beating against the glass like a living thing, as if the rain itself wanted to remind me of her voice. I stood by the window, drink in hand, staring down at the endless streets below where taxis weaved through puddles of light. The city was awake, alive, unapologetic. And yet I felt more disconnected than ever. The sound of her question had burrowed into my head like a melody I couldn't silence. "Will you be my mom for one day?" It replayed on loop, soft but persistent, like a ghost whispering through every quiet corner of my mind. I'd faced ruthless competitors, hostile takeovers, and betrayals that could ruin reputations overnight, but I'd never felt haunted until now. The next morning came too soon, and I forced myself into routine. I put on the same tailored suit, tied the same silk knot, and stepped into the same waiting car. The city looked freshly washed by the rain, but I felt filthy inside, tainted by emotions I didn't have names for. By the time I entered the glass tower of my company, I had already convinced myself that I could bury it. Work had always been my weapon against feeling. Numbers, meetings, strategies, they all had one thing in common. They didn't talk back. They didn't ask questions I couldn't answer. But that day, nothing worked. My assistant, Rebecca, noticed it first. She was efficient, precise, the kind of woman who could read a room in a second. And she could read me even faster. "You're not here," she said softly after our third meeting of the morning. I looked up from the financial report I hadn't read a single word of. "Excuse me?" She crossed her arms, unbothered by the title on my office door. "Your body's in this building, but your mind's somewhere else. I've never seen you this distracted." I forced a smile, the kind that looked convincing enough to make her stop digging. "Just didn't sleep well," I said, hoping she'd let it go. But as she left, she gave me a look that lingered, half concern, half curiosity. Maybe she sensed what I refused to admit. Something had cracked inside me. The hours crawled by. My schedule was full, yet the minutes felt empty. Every voice in the conference room sounded distant, muffled by the echo of that child's question. Every polished handshake reminded me how many people pretended to care about me, and how none of them actually did. I tried to reason with myself. She's just a child. You don't even know her name. You owe her nothing. But logic couldn't compete with the image of her standing in the rain, smiling through heartbreak. By afternoon, I was pacing my office, staring at the card I'd kept hidden in my desk drawer. The ink had bled from the rain, but the heart was still visible, its red color faded but stubborn, like the memory of her. I traced the uneven lines with my finger and realized, with a sting of unease, that I hadn't felt this kind of ache in years. That realization sent me spiraling back in time, to a memory I'd buried so deep I'd convinced myself it wasn't real. I was 9 years old, sitting on the back steps of a crumbling house, watching the sun go down behind a row of power lines. My father's shouting echoed from inside. Another night, another argument, another promise broken. My mother was already gone, and I had learned that silence was safer than crying. When neighbors passed, I'd smile the same way that little girl had smiled. Polite, practiced, pretending. Maybe that's why she had gotten to me. Because once, a long time ago, I was her. I thought success had erased that boy from existence. But apparently, he had been waiting all this time, quiet and patient, ready to remind me that I hadn't escaped him at all. As night fell again, I didn't bother turning on the lights. The city glowed beneath me, a sea of glittering promises. But none of it reached me anymore. My reflection in the glass looked older, lonelier, smaller. I pressed my hand to the window and felt the chill of the glass seep into my skin, grounding me in a reality I didn't want to face. For the first time in decades, I felt something that couldn't be bought, measured, or silenced. It was guilt, yes, but also something deeper, an ache that felt dangerously close to compassion. I poured myself another drink, but it didn't help. Alcohol numbs pain. It doesn't erase questions. And hers was the kind of question that demanded to be answered, not ignored. I sat down on the couch, her card still in my hand, and whispered the words under my breath as if saying them aloud might help me understand. "Will you be my mom for one day?" I laughed quietly, a sound that didn't feel like laughter at all. It was absurd, impossible, yet completely devastating. Because what she wanted wasn't a mother. It was connection. It was someone to choose her, even for a moment. And that realization tore something open in me that had been locked away for far too long. Outside, thunder rolled over the city again, distant but familiar. The rain had returned, softer this time, like a memory revisiting rather than a storm beginning. I stood once more by the window, watching droplets slide down the glass like tears I refused to shed. Rebecca had gone home hours ago. The office floors below were empty, their lights fading one by one, until only mine remained. The silence pressed in around me, thick and accusing. I knew what it meant. It meant that somewhere in this city, a little girl was probably sleeping in a shelter, her hands still stained with crayon ink, dreaming of a mother who would never come back. And here I was, surrounded by everything money could buy, unable to sleep because of something money couldn't fix. I leaned my forehead against the glass and whispered to no one. "Why her?" There was no answer, just the hum of the city below. But deep down, I already knew why. Because she had asked for something I didn't know how to give. And in doing so, she reminded me that I had nothing real to offer anyone. When dawn finally arrived, it painted the skyline in gold and gray. I hadn't closed my eyes once, and yet I didn't feel tired. I felt restless, alive, haunted. The world outside moved as if nothing had changed, but I knew better. Something inside me had shifted, and I couldn't go back to pretending anymore. As the first taxis began to fill the streets, I grabbed my coat, slipped the faded card into my pocket, and walked out of the penthouse without a plan. The air was sharp, clean after the night's storm, filled with a kind of purpose I hadn't felt in years. At sunrise, I ordered my driver to change the route, because fate had given me one last chance to answer a question I should never have ignored. When destiny repeats itself, it's not coincidence, it's a second chance. The next morning came dressed in fog and drizzle, the kind of New York gray that blurred the skyline and softened the edges of everything. I hadn't slept again. The hours had passed in fragments of restless thought, every one of them circling back to that little voice in the rain. I told myself I was only driving that way because the route was shorter, that I wasn't chasing anything, that I had a company to run and more important things to think about. But the truth pulsed beneath every breath. I wanted to see her again. The driver didn't question me when I asked him to take Lexington instead of the expressway. My assistant had already filled the day's calendar with meetings, yet each entry on the screen looked meaningless. The only thing that felt real was the memory of those small hands holding wet paper hearts. The rain was lighter this time, a mist that hovered over the streets like breath. We slowed as we neared the corner, and then I saw her. She was there again, standing near the same lamppost, her figure outlined against the soft gray morning. Her coat was still too thin, her shoes still too worn. The bundle of handmade cards was wrapped in a plastic bag, tucked beneath her arm. She wasn't shouting or waving for attention. She simply stood there, waiting with quiet patience as the city moved around her. For a moment, I just watched. Something in me wanted to make sure she was real, that she hadn't been a dream conjured by guilt. The sight of her made my chest tighten in ways I couldn't control. "Stop here," I said. And before the driver could protest, I was out of the car and walking toward her. She turned at the sound of my steps, and for the first time, I saw her face light up. Not in surprise, but in recognition. "You came back," she said, smiling shyly, her voice soft but steady. "I guess I did," I replied. The words felt strange in my mouth, awkward like a language I hadn't spoken in years. She tilted her head, studying me with the curiosity only children have. "You look tired," she said. "Maybe you didn't sleep?" I almost laughed at how simply she'd cut through my pretense. "No," I admitted. "I didn't." "That's bad for your heart," she said matter-of-factly, as if repeating something she'd been told. "My mom used to say hearts get heavy when you don't rest." I didn't know how to answer that, so I just nodded. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. It felt fragile, almost sacred. "Do you still have your cards?" I asked finally. She nodded, lifting the bag carefully. "I made new ones last night." "Even in this weather?" She smiled again, a small shrug of her shoulders. If I stop, no one will remember to buy them, and I need to buy flowers before Sunday. What's on Sunday? I asked, though I already knew. Mother's Day. Her tone softened. I go to her grave every year. She liked white lilies. There was no self-pity in her voice, only a quiet matter-of-factness that made it harder to bear. I could see her mother in my mind, a woman whose kindness must have taught her daughter how to smile through pain. And your father? I asked carefully. Her expression didn't change, but her eyes shifted toward the wet pavement. I don't know, she said. Mom said he was kind once, but life made him tired. The simplicity of it stunned me. She said it like it wasn't a tragedy, just a truth. Who takes care of you now? I asked, trying to keep my voice gentle. The shelter, she said. They're nice, but it's not home. Those words landed heavier than she could ever know. I thought about the penthouse waiting for me, the walls of glass and silence, the emptiness that echoed through every room. For the first time, I wasn't sure which of us was lonelier. How much for the cards? I asked quietly. She looked up, her eyes bright even in the rain. $5 each. I reached for my wallet. I'll take all of them. Her brow furrowed, confused. All? Yes, all. You shouldn't be standing out here. You could get sick. For a moment, she didn't move. Then she shook her head slowly, water dripping from her hair. You can buy them, she said, but not my wish. The words stopped me. What's your wish? I asked. She hesitated, her fingers tightening around the bag. To spend one day with my mom again. The rain had picked up again, soft but steady, and I couldn't tell if it was the weather or something inside me that made the world blur. I swallowed hard, the weight of her honesty pressing against the shell of who I'd been. I'm sorry, I said, and even I didn't know what I was apologizing for. Maybe for her pain. Maybe for every person who had walked past her without seeing her. Maybe for the years I'd spent believing my money could buy meaning. She smiled faintly, the kind of smile people wear when they're used to disappointment. It's okay. People always say sorry when they don't know what else to say. That innocence, so matter-of-fact, so painfully wise, made me feel smaller than I ever had in a room full of power. I wanted to help her, but I didn't know how. I wasn't built for tenderness. I was built for transactions, for things that could be measured, signed, delivered. But this small girl with paper hearts and impossible wishes didn't fit any contract I could make. Do you have somewhere to go after this? I asked. The shelter closes at 9, she said. They let me come back for dinner. I sell my cards after school, then I walk back before it's dark. Do they know you're out here in the rain? She shrugged. Sometimes they worry, but I tell them I'm fine. I'm used to it. Her words struck like a blade hidden in a whisper. Children aren't supposed to be used to it. Children are supposed to believe the world will take care of them. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a bill, folding it before offering it to her. Here, I said softly. For the lilies. She hesitated, then took it carefully, her small fingers brushing mine. Thank you, she said. Then she looked up again, her expression serious. But promise you won't feel sad for me. I don't like when people feel sad for me. I almost smiled. Why not? Because then they forget to be kind. Sad people walk away faster. It was such a simple observation, and yet it carried the weight of experience far beyond her years. She tucked the bill into her pocket, turned, and began to walk away, her steps light despite the waterlogged sidewalk. For a moment, I wanted to follow, to make sure she reached the shelter safely. But I didn't. I just stood there, the sound of her small shoes fading into the hum of traffic. As I walked back to the car, the driver looked at me through the mirror, waiting for instructions. I didn't speak. My throat felt tight, my chest heavier than before. I sat down, closed the door, and watched the rain blur the world outside. Her last words, "You can buy them, but not my wish," echoed through the quiet, looping endlessly in my mind. I had spent my whole life buying things: respect, security, comfort. But not once had I bought something that made me feel human. That sentence followed me home, whispering through the halls of my empty apartment, and with every echo, I could feel the man I used to be starting to break. Sometimes, words escape before reason can stop them, and they change everything. I didn't plan to see her again, not really. At least, that's what I told myself as I sat in the back of the car the following morning, my heart thudding like it hadn't in years. The city was alive in its usual rhythm: horns, crosswalk chatter, the metallic symphony of morning. But for the first time, I wasn't rushing toward a meeting or a contract. I was chasing a feeling I couldn't name. It wasn't logic that brought me back to that corner on Lexington Avenue. Logic would have told me to forget, to let the moment pass like an odd encounter with a stranger that meant nothing in the larger scale of my empire. But reason had lost its grip on me. Something else had taken over. Something softer, uncomfortably human. The rain had stopped. Puddles shimmered like broken glass beneath the rising sun. I spotted her almost immediately. The same small frame, the same worn coat, the same determination in her eyes. Only this time, she wasn't alone. Two women stood near her, one holding a clipboard, the other with an umbrella, both dressed in the kind of clothes that spoke of underfunded kindness. Shelter staff. They watched her with patient eyes, the way caretakers do when they've learned to expect both resilience and heartbreak in the same breath. When I stepped out of the car, her head lifted, and the moment our eyes met, she smiled. That same shy, disarming smile that had been haunting my nights. "You came back," she said, her voice full of quiet wonder, as if she'd wished for it but never really believed it would happen. "I did," I replied, my voice lower than usual, my throat tight. "I couldn't forget what you said." The shelter workers exchanged glances, one of them stepping forward. "Sir, can we help you?" I nodded politely, forcing calm into my tone. "I just wanted to speak with her for a moment. I met her the other day." The older woman frowned slightly. "We try to keep her close to the building. It's not safe out here alone." "I understand," I said. "I won't keep her long." They hesitated, but eventually stepped back. The girl watched me, eyes wide, waiting. For a moment, I didn't know how to start. Everything I'd rehearsed on the drive over vanished the second I saw her. The polished businessman in me wanted to be careful, measured, detached. But the man standing there, the one she had somehow pulled out from under all that armor, spoke before reason could stop him. "If you still want," I said quietly, my heart pounding in my chest, "I'll be your mom for one day." Her mouth fell open. For a heartbeat, she just stared, like she wasn't sure she'd heard me right. Then her face broke into the kind of joy that can't be faked. Laughter that rang out bright and unfiltered, the sound of innocence I didn't realize I'd been starving for. The shelter workers looked stunned, unsure whether to intervene or simply let the moment breathe. She ran to me, clutching her small bag of cards like a treasure, her smile so wide it made my chest ache. "You really mean it?" she asked, breathless. I nodded, fighting the unfamiliar burn behind my eyes. "Yeah," I said softly. "I mean it." That was how it began. The strangest, simplest day of my life. We started at a small diner on the corner, the kind of place I'd passed 1,000 times but never entered. She sat across from me in a red vinyl booth, her chin barely reaching the table. When the waitress brought pancakes, she didn't attack them like a hungry child would. Instead, she ate slowly, carefully, savoring each bite like it was a gift. "This is the best breakfast I ever had," she said between mouthfuls, smiling up at me with maple syrup on her lip. I smiled back, something loosening in my chest. "Glad to hear it." She tilted her head. "You don't eat much, huh?" I looked down at my untouched plate. "Guess I forgot how." Her brow furrowed, and she said the most innocent, devastating thing. "You should remember, people who forget to eat usually forget to smile too." I laughed, a real, unguarded laugh, And for the first time in years, it didn't sound hollow. After breakfast, she wanted to go to the park. Central Park was alive with families, joggers, and street performers. She watched them all like the world was brand new. Every squirrel was a marvel, every kite a miracle. She asked questions about everything: the buildings, the pigeons, the man painting by the fountain. I found myself answering, not out of duty but with genuine interest, rediscovering wonder through her eyes. When we reached the carousel, she hesitated, looking at the horses with quiet awe. "I've never been on one before," she whispered. "Then today's the day," I said. She looked up at me. "Are you sure?" "Completely." Her laughter filled the air as the music started. I stood beside the ride, watching her circle past me again and again, her hair flying, her arms raised in joy. People glanced at me, probably wondering why a man in an expensive suit was smiling like a fool at a child he barely knew. But in that moment, I didn't care who saw. I didn't care about anything except the sound of her happiness. Afterward, we walked along the lake, and she insisted on feeding the ducks with bits of leftover bread. When I pulled out my phone, she giggled. "You're taking a picture?" "Of course," I said. "How else will I remember today?" She struck a playful pose, holding up her cards like trophies. I snapped the photo, capturing something I hadn't realized I'd lost: simplicity. We spent hours like that, walking, talking, laughing. She told me about her dreams, how she wanted to be a teacher, how she liked drawing houses with big windows so the light can always come in. Each sentence she spoke chipped away another layer of the man I'd become, the man who had spent years building walls against emotion. By the time afternoon faded into gold, I felt lighter. Not happy exactly. Happiness was too fragile a word. But present. Alive. We ended the day sitting on a park bench, the sky painted with streaks of pink and amber. She leaned against my arm, exhausted but smiling. I wanted to freeze the moment, to stretch it across eternity, to protect her from the cruel truths waiting outside this pocket of peace. "You know," she said softly, "you're good at this." "At what?" I asked. "Being a mom," she giggled. I chuckled, shaking my head. "Don't tell anyone. They might start asking for lessons." She laughed, then went quiet, her small fingers tracing the hem of her sleeve. The pause between us stretched longer than before, and I could feel her thinking. The kind of deep thought children aren't supposed to carry. When she finally spoke, her voice was smaller, more fragile. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course," I said, my heart suddenly uneasy. She looked up at me with eyes too honest for their age. "Do you think moms ever miss their kids in heaven?" I froze, the air leaving my lungs. The question struck straight through the scar I'd spent years pretending had healed. The one carved by a grave I never talked about, by a love I'd buried under ambition and silence. I forced a breath, steady but trembling, the weight of the past pressing against the moment like a shadow I couldn't escape. Before the day ended, she asked that question, and with it reopened an old wound I thought time had buried for good. Behind every innocent smile hides a truth the world ignored. The sun had already begun to dip behind the city skyline when I started driving her back to the shelter. The laughter that had filled our day still lingered faintly in the air, the echo of carousel music, the sound of her joy carried on the wind. But beneath that lightness was a quiet ache I couldn't name. The streets glowed amber as the evening lights flickered on, and for the first time in years, I felt something heavy shift inside me. She sat beside me in the back seat, her legs barely reaching the edge of the seat, her eyes glued to the passing lights outside the window. Her hands clutched her small bag of handmade cards like they were the most precious things in the world. Every few minutes, she'd glance up at me, smiling softly, and I'd feel that strange, unfamiliar warmth rise again. The kind that doesn't ask for anything. The kind that simply is. "Did you have fun today?" I asked finally, my voice quieter than I meant it to be. She turned to me, her face glowing with that rare, unfiltered happiness that no amount of money could ever buy. "It was the best day ever," she said. Then, after a moment's hesitation, she added, "I think my mom would have liked you." The words caught me off guard. My throat tightened, and I forced a smile. "She sounds like someone with good taste, then." She giggled at that, the sound pure and small, before reaching into her bag. "Do you want to see her?" Before I could respond, she pulled out a photo. Old, crumpled, its corners worn from being touched too many times. She smoothed it carefully on her lap, as if it were something sacred. "This is her," she said proudly, holding it out for me to see. I leaned forward, taking the photograph in my hands. The image was faded but clear enough to make out the woman's face. Soft eyes, gentle smile, the kind of warmth that radiates even from paper. But something about her struck me instantly, a flicker of recognition that made my heart skip. "She's beautiful," I said, my voice unsteady. "She was," the girl corrected gently, "before she got sick." I nodded, my gaze still locked on the photo. My mind raced, searching for a reason why this woman's face tugged at some forgotten part of me. I'd met thousands of people over the years, employees, clients, strangers at charity events. But this was different. This wasn't a face you just met. This was a face that felt remembered. I handed the picture back, my fingers brushing hers. "Where was this taken?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "At the old fairgrounds, I think. Mom said it was her favorite day ever. She always said, the sky looked happy that day." Something twisted in my chest. "And your dad?" I asked carefully. Her smile faltered. For a long moment, she didn't answer. The city lights flashed across her face as the car passed under a bridge, and when she finally spoke, her voice was quieter, more fragile. "Mom said he was a good man once," she whispered. There was something in the way she said once that pierced through me like a blade. I didn't know why, but guilt, sharp, sudden, inexplicable, clawed at the edges of my mind. The air in the car grew heavier. I wanted to ask more, but instinct told me to stop. Some truths, I sensed, weren't ready to be spoken yet. The driver pulled to a slow stop in front of the shelter, a brick building tucked between a grocery and a laundromat, its flickering neon sign barely visible in the dim light. The staff were waiting by the door, smiling when they saw her. As I stepped out and opened her door, she hopped down, clutching her bag. But before heading toward the entrance, she turned to me. "I made this for you," she said, pulling out one last card from her bag. It was small, wrinkled, the ink smudged in places. She held it out carefully, like it was something fragile. I opened it. Inside, drawn in bright marker, were two figures, one tall, one small, standing hand in hand beneath a crooked sun. Above them were 5 words, written in shaky, childlike letters. "Thank you for being my mom today." My chest tightened. I couldn't look away from the drawing, from the small figure with the crooked smile, from the larger one with eyes that looked too much like mine. "Do you like it?" she asked. I swallowed hard, my voice barely a whisper. "More than you'll ever know." She grinned, proud, then wrapped her arms around my waist, a quick, sudden hug that broke me in ways I didn't expect. I stood there, frozen, afraid to move, because if I did, I might shatter completely. When she pulled away, she waved, her little hand bright against the darkening sky. "Bye, Mom," she said softly before running inside. The door closed behind her, and I stood there alone, the card still open in my hand. I don't know how long I stayed like that, watching the flickering light above the shelter door, listening to the faint hum of traffic, feeling the echo of a hug that shouldn't have mattered as much as it did. Back in the car, I couldn't bring myself to speak. The driver waited for instructions, but I only said, "Just drive." We moved through the city's neon veins, the buildings passing in blurs of gold and gray. I stared out the window, the reflection of my own face merging with the lights outside, and thought about the woman in that photograph, about her eyes, her smile, the strange familiarity that refused to let go. By the time I reached home, night had settled completely. The penthouse was as silent as ever, the kind of silence that mocks you when you've run out of excuses for why you're alone. I placed the card on my desk beside the untouched whiskey glass and walked to the shelf that held my old photo albums. I hadn't opened them in years. I told myself they belonged to another lifetime. But that night, something inside me demanded answers. My hands trembled as I pulled one of the albums down. The leather cracked from time, the corners bent. I flipped through the pages slowly, memories blurring together. Business galas, vacations, faces I no longer remembered, until one photograph stopped me cold. It was from a summer long ago, taken at a charity event in Queens. A woman stood in the background, smiling shyly at the camera, holding a little girl's hand. The woman's eyes were unmistakable. My pulse quickened, my mouth dry. I leaned closer to the faded image, tracing the outline of her face. The same eyes, the same smile, the same warmth that had followed me through the rain. When I opened my old photo album that night, I found her mother's face staring back at me. And the truth I'd buried was finally waking up. The past doesn't disappear. It waits for the moment you're too weak to resist it. The photograph trembled in my hands, though the apartment around me was perfectly still. The woman in the image smiled with the same quiet grace I remembered, her eyes soft, yet carrying that depth of knowing that used to disarm me without effort. I hadn't seen that face in over a decade, but memory doesn't fade. It just buries itself until something or someone digs it up again. Her name was Evelyn. I said it aloud, and it sounded foreign, like a word from another life. Once she had been my entire world, the reason I believed in late-night walks and small dreams, in laughter that needed no audience, in the kind of love that didn't demand proof. We were young, reckless, and poor. But we had hope then, and hope had always been her favorite currency. I met her in a coffee shop downtown, back when I was still chasing a future I couldn't see. She worked part-time there while finishing art school. She was the kind of person who could make silence feel like conversation, the kind who'd paint meaning into the most ordinary moments. She'd tease me for carrying a briefcase with nothing in it but ambition. "You can't hold love in contracts," she'd said once, her laughter light. "You'll learn that one day." I hadn't learned it then. We spent 3 years together. 3 years of small apartments, shared takeout boxes, and whispered promises that we both believed. I was certain I'd marry her, that I'd build her a world where she'd never have to struggle again. But ambition, when fed too long, turns into hunger. And hunger devours everything soft. When I got the offer that would set the foundation for my first company, it came with conditions: travel, time, distance. She told me she didn't care about money, that she'd rather have my attention than my success. I told her that once I built something, once I became someone, she'd never have to worry again. She didn't argue. She just smiled that same sad smile, the one she used when she knew she was losing something she couldn't save. And then she was gone. No dramatic goodbye, no angry letters. Just silence. One day she was there, and the next the apartment was empty except for a small canvas she'd left behind. An unfinished painting of the two of us, standing beneath a tree, the branches reaching upward as if holding on for dear life. I threw myself into work after that, pretending I'd chosen the right path. The money came, then fame, then everything I thought I wanted. But every success was a little quieter than it should have been, every celebration a little more hollow. I told myself I'd moved on, that love was a distraction, that people were just risks you couldn't control. And yet, now, years later, staring at her photograph in the hands of a little girl who had asked me to be her mother for a day, I felt every lie I'd told myself crumble. It couldn't be coincidence. The timelines matched. The age, the city, The familiarity in that child's eyes that looked far too much like Evelyn's. The possibility formed like a shadow creeping through my mind. At first unthinkable, then undeniable. She might be mine. My heart began to pound so violently I could hear it echoing through the empty penthouse. I sank into the couch, gripping the photograph, my mind spinning between disbelief and guilt. If it was true, if that little girl was Evelyn's daughter, my daughter, then I had spent years living in luxury, while my own child stood on street corners selling handmade cards to buy flowers for a grave. The thought gutted me. I had always believed my loneliness was self-inflicted, that it was the price I paid for success. But this was different. This was punishment. This was consequence. I stood abruptly, pacing the length of the room as the truth unfolded in pieces. I remembered a call years ago, a brief one from an unknown number. A woman's voice, faint, hesitant. She hadn't said her name, but I'd known it was her. She'd asked if I was happy, if I'd found what I was looking for. I'd answered like a fool, proud and careless. Yes, I'd said. And the line had gone dead. What if that had been her goodbye? I went to my desk and powered on the computer, my hands shaking as I began searching through old archives, donation records, hospital reports, anything that could connect her name to the city, to a time, to a life I had missed entirely. Hours blurred into minutes. The glow of the screen illuminated the dark apartment as I dove deeper. Old addresses, charity databases, news bulletins. Each new page fed both my desperation and my dread. At one point, I found an old record from a city hospital, a charity I'd once donated to without a second thought. Her name appeared on the patient list. My stomach dropped. The date aligned with the year I'd seen her last. I clicked through, but the record ended abruptly. No forwarding information, no family contacts listed. Just one small note. Child discharged to local shelter program. My pulse stopped for a second. A shelter program. I pulled open a map of New York, zooming into the area near Lexington Avenue. The shelter's name appeared on the screen, the same one where that little girl said she lived. Every wall of denial I'd built collapsed in that instant. The pieces fit too perfectly, too painfully. The woman I had once loved had lived out her final days quietly, unseen, while I built empires that meant nothing. And the child she left behind, the one who looked up at me with those familiar eyes, had been right there, waiting under the rain. I felt a kind of grief I didn't know how to hold. Grief for Evelyn, for the girl, for the years I could never reclaim. Success had stolen time, and time had stolen everything else. By now the sky outside was pale, the color of ash before dawn. I sat there, surrounded by evidence and memory, the weight of both pressing against my chest until breathing hurt. I knew what I had to do. I needed to know for sure. The truth wasn't a choice anymore. It was a demand. As the first light of morning crept through the window, I reached for the pile of documents I'd printed, my eyes catching on one line I hadn't noticed before. A name scrawled in familiar handwriting on a legal form, faded but still legible. Her handwriting. At dawn, my eyes landed on one forgotten document, and in her handwriting, I saw the confirmation my heart had already accepted. The girl in the rain was mine. The truth doesn't shout. It whispers through the things we try to ignore. Morning bled into the room slowly, carrying with it the pale gray light of a city that never really wakes, only shifts from one kind of noise to another. I hadn't slept. The desk in front of me was buried beneath papers, hospital files, donation records, fragments of a past I'd spent half my life pretending didn't exist. My hands shook as I turned another page, not because I feared what I would find, but because I already knew. The pieces fit too perfectly, and denial no longer had anywhere to hide. The photograph of Evelyn sat beside the papers, her smile faded with age but still luminous enough to hurt. I'd spent so many years running from her memory that now, staring into it again, I felt like I was standing at the edge of something infinite. Grief, guilt, love, all twisting together until I couldn't tell one from the other. The envelope that changed everything was buried near the bottom of the stack. It was small, unmarked, its corners frayed. The hospital logo had nearly rubbed off, but the date stamped in the corner froze me in place. It was from the same year she disappeared. The same year I thought I'd chosen ambition over heartbreak. I opened it, carefully, the paper inside brittle from time. My eyes scanned the printed words, medical forms, treatment notes, and then stopped cold at a line near the bottom. Next of kin guardian, designated if condition worsens. Name. My name. For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The words blurred, my pulse echoing in my ears. Evelyn had written my name. She hadn't forgotten me. I pressed my fingers to the page, tracing the letters like they were sacred. After all the years I'd told myself she'd moved on, that she'd chosen someone better, that she'd stopped loving me. The truth sat there, quiet and undeniable. She hadn't stopped. She'd trusted me, even after I'd abandoned her. She must have known she was dying when she signed that paper. She must have looked at her daughter and believed, in some impossible, selfless way, that I would come back. That realization broke me. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of it all pressing down until I couldn't hold myself upright anymore. My breath came in shallow bursts, my chest tight. I had been proud of the man I'd become, the success, the wealth, the control, but in that moment I saw what I really was. A coward wrapped in a suit, hiding from the wreckage of his own choices. I had spent years building walls made of glass and ego, thinking they made me untouchable. But now, all it took was one fragile piece of paper to bring them crashing down. When the first tear fell, I didn't try to stop it. And once it started, I couldn't. I cried for her, for the years she had faced alone, for the child who'd grown up believing love was temporary. I cried for myself, for the man who had everything except the courage to look back. The sound of rain began against the windows, soft at first, then heavier. It felt almost deliberate, as if the world outside was echoing what I couldn't say aloud. Beneath the medical forms was another paper, folded in half. My name was written across it, in her handwriting. I knew it instantly. It was the same looping, graceful scrawl that used to fill the notes she'd leave on my desk, on napkins, in the margins of her sketchbooks. My fingers hesitated, trembling as I unfolded it. The ink had faded, but the words were still clear enough to read. If you ever find this, it means I couldn't tell you goodbye the way I wanted to. I don't want you to feel sorry for me, not even for a second. I just want you to know that I never stopped believing in you, even when it hurt to keep believing. You were never cruel, only afraid. Afraid of being small, afraid of being forgotten. But you were never small to me. When you walked away, I told myself you needed to. I told myself that one day you'd look back and understand what love really means, not the kind you build empires with, but the kind that stays when the empires fall. Our daughter is kind. She has your eyes. When she laughs, she sounds like everything I loved about you. I didn't tell her your name, not because I wanted to keep you from her, but because I wanted her to find you on her own. She deserves to see who you really are. Not the man the world sees, but the one who used to bring me coffee at sunrise just because he wanted to watch the light hit my face. If you ever read this, please, don't let her grow up believing the world forgot her. Don't let her carry my silence as her inheritance. And if you can, forgive me for leaving before you were ready to be found. The letter ended there. No signature, just the faintest mark of her hand, as if she'd pressed it against the paper after finishing. I read it again and again, until the words blurred and my vision swam. Each line felt like a thread pulling me backward in time, to every moment I'd buried, every word I'd left unsaid. She hadn't written it for guilt or for pity. She'd written it for hope. She'd believed that one day, somehow, I'd find my way back to them. And I had. The thought made my throat ache. I folded the letter carefully, pressing it to my chest, as if holding it closer could make up for the years I'd lost. I whispered her name once, quietly, afraid it might break if I said it too loud. Evelyn. I had loved her once, and somewhere deep down, I realized I still did. But love without action is just memory. And I was done living in memory. The little girl's face appeared in my mind again, her eyes wide and trusting, her voice small but certain. "Will you be my mom for one day?" I understood now. She hadn't been asking for pity. She'd been reaching for something her mother had left unfinished, one last connection, one final bridge between two halves of a life divided by time. I looked around the room. The marble floors, the expensive art, the empty perfection of a life without meaning. And it felt wrong. Every inch of it was built on the lie that success could replace love. I wanted none of it. I wiped my face, stood, and gathered the papers, tucking the letter safely into my pocket. There was no going back to who I was before this. The only thing left was to move forward, to make it right, however late, however imperfectly. But as I reached for the doorknob, my hand froze. Because a new kind of fear had taken root. How do you face a child who sees you as a stranger and tell her that the stranger she trusted for a single day is her father? How do you say I should have been there, when there are no words heavy enough to carry the truth? I didn't know the answer. I only knew that I had to try. The letter had given me the truth, but as the first light broke through the storm, another question rose louder than all the rest. How do you tell a child that the stranger she trusted is her father? I could face a board of shareholders, but not the truth in a child's eyes. The morning after I found Evelyn's letter, the city looked different. The same skyline stretched outside my window. The same rhythm of traffic hummed below, but everything felt quieter, almost hesitant, as if the world itself knew what I was about to do. I sat at my desk for hours, the letter folded neatly beside a photograph of Evelyn, the ink on her handwriting now burned into my memory. Every part of me wanted to turn away, to bury the truth again, and go back to the safety of ignorance. But her words, "Don't let her grow up believing the world forgot her," wouldn't let me breathe until I did what she asked. By noon, I was sitting in the car outside the shelter, my hands gripping the steering wheel hard enough to leave marks. My heart was hammering in my chest in a way I hadn't felt since my first business pitch. Only this time, the stakes weren't numbers or contracts. They were something far more fragile. The building was the same, modest and unremarkable, a forgotten corner of the city that carried more hope than anyone ever noticed. Children played in a small fenced yard, their laughter echoing against the brick walls. And among them, there she was. She sat on the steps, drawing in a notebook balanced on her knees, her hair pulled into a loose braid. The sight of her nearly brought me to my knees. Every small movement, every tilt of her head, every trace of expression reminded me of Evelyn. I could see her mother's spirit living and breathing inside this child. The same resilience, the same quiet strength. When she looked up and saw me, her eyes widened and she smiled. "You came back," she said, jumping to her feet, her sketchbook pressed to her chest. I tried to smile, but it faltered. "Yeah," I managed, my voice thin. "I had to see you." The shelter worker nearby gave me a polite nod, recognizing me from before. "You can talk to her, but keep it short. It's almost lunch," she said kindly before walking away. I nodded, though the words barely registered. My entire focus was on the small girl in front of me, the one who had unknowingly rearranged the entire order of my life. "I brought something," I said, reaching into my coat pocket. My fingers trembled as I pulled out the photograph, the same one she had shown me in the car days ago, only this copy had come from my old album. I handed it to her carefully. She tilted her head, studying it. The moment her eyes fell on the image, her lips parted in surprise. "That's my mom," she whispered. Then, after a second, confusion crept across her face. "How do you have this?" Her question pierced through the air like glass shattering. My throat felt dry. I'd rehearsed this moment all night, a dozen versions of it, and every one of them had fallen apart before I could finish. There was no perfect way to tell a child that the life she'd lived in pieces had always been connected to you. The stranger she barely knew. "I knew her," I said quietly. "A long time ago." Her eyes searched mine, curious and cautious. You did?" "Yes," I said, the word trembling. "She was very important to me." Her small hands tightened around the photo. "Did you love her?" The question was so pure, so painfully simple that it nearly broke me. I nodded. "Yes, more than anything." She looked down at the photo again, tracing her mother's face with her thumb. "She used to tell me stories about someone who loved her once," she murmured. "A man who left because he thought he wasn't good enough." I felt my heart stutter. I could barely find my voice. "She said that?" She nodded. "She said he had kind eyes but didn't know how to stay." The weight of those words crushed me. I knelt down so I was eye level with her, forcing myself to hold her gaze. "I was that man," I whispered. She froze, her small brow furrowing. "What?" I took a deep breath that trembled on the way out. "Your mother, Evelyn? I loved her. I left because I was stupid and selfish, and I didn't know about you. Not until now." Silence fell between us, heavy and suffocating. She stared at me, her face unreadable, her wide eyes flicking between the photograph and me, as if trying to piece together a puzzle that didn't make sense. "I'm your father," I said finally, the words shaking as they left my lips. "I didn't know, sweetheart. I swear I didn't know." The world around us seemed to disappear. No sound, no motion, just her standing there with the truth hanging between us. My chest ached with the weight of it. I wanted to reach for her, to bridge the distance, but I couldn't. I didn't deserve that yet. Her hands trembled around the photograph. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. The expression on her face was unreadable. Shock, disbelief, maybe even fear. The seconds stretched endlessly. "I'm sorry," I said softly. "I should have been there. I should have found you sooner." My voice cracked under the weight of regret. "Your mom wanted you to have someone. She wanted you to be loved. And I broke off, unable to finish. She looked at me for a long moment, her eyes filling slowly, the glimmer of tears catching the light. But she didn't cry. She just kept staring at me like she was trying to see the truth in my face. "Why now?" she asked finally, her voice small. "Because I found out," I said. "I found her letter. She told me about you. And when I saw you again, I knew. I knew before I even read it, but I was too afraid to believe it." The tears that I'd been holding back burned behind my eyes. "I can't change the past," I said. "But if you'll let me, I'd like to be part of your future, however you want me to." For a long time, she said nothing. The silence was unbearable, not the comfortable kind we'd shared before, but the kind that split open everything inside me. Then she took a step back, holding the photo to her chest like a shield. Her face was pale, her expression fragile. She didn't speak. Not a word. The seconds turned into minutes. My heart pounded in my ears as the weight of my confession sank into the space between us, heavy and unrelenting. And then, just as I began to fear she might turn away, she opened her mouth. She didn't speak for a long time, and when she finally did, the words that came out weren't what I expected at all. Her forgiveness felt heavier than my guilt. The moment hung between us like fragile glass. One breath, one heartbeat away from shattering. She stood there, clutching the photograph to her chest, her small fingers trembling. I waited, afraid to move, afraid that even the sound of my breathing might break the delicate balance holding us together. Then she whispered it, so quiet that if I hadn't been watching her lips, I might have missed it completely. "You're late." The words didn't come with anger or accusation. They came like a truth too heavy for her small voice to carry. And yet somehow she did. It was the kind of statement that didn't need explanation. It simply existed, cutting through everything I wanted to say. My knees weakened. Every apology I'd rehearsed, every word I thought might make it better, vanished. There was no defense against that kind of truth. She was right. I was late to her life, to her laughter, to every birthday, every scraped knee, every moment I should have been there. Tears burned at the corners of my eyes before I could stop them. "I know," I said, my voice breaking. "I'm so sorry. I didn't know, sweetheart. I swear I didn't know." She looked at me with those eyes, Evelyn's eyes, and something inside me cracked wide open. I'd spent years being strong in all the wrong ways, in silence, in distance, in control. But standing there, in front of that little girl, I realized that real strength wasn't in hiding your pain. It was in showing it. The first tear slipped down my face, then another, and another. I tried to speak again, but all that came out were pieces of words and choked breaths. I had faced boardrooms filled with critics, lost millions in a single deal, rebuilt empires from nothing. But I had never felt this helpless. She stepped forward before I could say anything else. Her small hand reached up, hesitated for a second, then brushed away the tears running down my cheek. Her touch was so light, so pure, that it stole the breath right out of me. "You came back," she whispered. "That's enough." Those 3 words hit harder than any punishment ever could. My entire body trembled with the weight of them. She wasn't angry. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't asking for explanations or reparations. She was just a child, my child, offering forgiveness I hadn't earned. I sank to my knees so that we were eye level, the world around us fading until it was just the 2 of us in that small, sunlit corner of the shelter. "I don't deserve that," I said softly, "but I'll spend the rest of my life trying to." Her burso antron eyes glistened, and for the first time she smiled. Not the polite smile she'd given strangers, not the guarded one she wore when selling her cards, but something open and fragile and real. Then she threw her arms around me. The hug came like a flood breaking a dam. I held her tight, so tight I was afraid I might crush her, but she didn't pull away. She just held on, small arms around my neck, her face pressed against my shoulder, and I felt her shoulders shake with quiet sobs. Mine weren't quiet. The tears came uncontrollably, years of suppressed emotion spilling out all at once. Regret, guilt, love, all of it tangled into something unrecognizable but pure. I buried my face in her hair, whispering over and over, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." She didn't say anything, just kept holding me, as if she understood that words weren't enough, that they never had been. When we finally pulled apart, both of us were crying, but her small hands stayed on my face, grounding me. I could see Evelyn in her completely now, the same light, the same compassion that once saved me from myself. And somehow, her forgiveness felt like Evelyn's too, reaching through her, giving me one last chance to do what I'd failed to before. Across the courtyard, the shelter staff had stopped what they were doing. A few stood near the doorway, their eyes glistening, their expressions soft. No one spoke. No one dared to interrupt. They didn't need to understand the details. They could see the truth written plainly in the way we clung to each other. For the first time in years, I wasn't pretending to be someone I wasn't. I wasn't the billionaire with a perfect life, or the man who hid his scars behind polished glass. I was just a father, broken, human, and desperate to be worthy of the little girl in front of me. After a while, she pulled back, wiping her own face with the sleeve of her jacket. "Can we go somewhere?" she asked softly. "Anywhere you want," I said. She thought for a moment, her expression thoughtful. "The park. Mom and I used to go there." I nodded. My voice wouldn't come, so I just took her hand. It was small, But she held on to mine with surprising strength, as if afraid I might disappear again if she let go. As we walked past the staff, one of them, an older woman with kind eyes, murmured something under her breath. "Miracles don't always come with wings," she said. "Sometimes they just wear rain-soaked shoes." I didn't respond, but her words stayed with me. We stepped outside, the afternoon sun filtering through the clouds, the streets still damp from the morning rain. The city moved around us, busy and unaware, but for me, time had slowed. Every step we took felt like the first step of a life I'd almost lost the chance to live. She looked up at me as we walked, her hand still in mine. "Do I call you Dad now?" she asked, the innocence in her voice both tender and painful. I smiled through the ache in my throat. "You can call me whatever feels right," I said. She nodded, satisfied with that answer. We walked the rest of the way in silence, but it wasn't the silence of strangers anymore. It was the silence of understanding, the kind that holds warmth instead of distance. For the first time in forever, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow might bring. I was afraid of losing it. But the hardest part wasn't finding her. It was proving I could stay. I thought I was saving her life, but she was saving mine. If someone had told me a year ago that I'd be sitting in a courthouse, trying to prove I was worthy of raising a child, I would have laughed. Not out of humor, but disbelief. Back then, I'd measured worth in numbers, in deals closed, in buildings that scraped the sky. But now, as I stood beside the little girl who had changed everything, none of that mattered. My entire world fit into the curve of her small hand gripping mine. The adoption process wasn't easy. Nothing meaningful ever is. My lawyers handled the paperwork, but I was the one being tested. My intentions, my past, even my heart. Reporters swarmed the story like it was gossip instead of life. Billionaire adopts orphan, publicity stunt or redemption. The headlines didn't care about truth. They cared about spectacle. And for the first time in my life, I didn't. Let them write what they wanted. The only opinion that mattered stood beside me, wearing a yellow ribbon in her hair and smiling nervously at the judge. When the gavel finally fell and the papers were signed, I didn't feel powerful. I felt small, humbled, undeserving, and profoundly grateful. The word guardian had never felt so sacred. At home, everything changed. My penthouse, once a monument to silence and emptiness, began to breathe again. Her laughter filled every corner like sunlight spilling through cracked walls. The marble floors that had echoed with loneliness now caught the sound of running footsteps and childish songs. She decorated my once perfect office walls with crayon drawings, stick figures of us holding hands beneath a crooked sun. I left them there, refusing to have them cleaned. The first night she stayed with me, I realized how little I knew about being a father. I burned dinner twice. I read bedtime stories too seriously, forgetting that magic didn't need logic. She laughed at my awkward attempts to braid her hair, and I found myself laughing too. The kind of laughter that feels like remembering who you used to be before the world hardened you. There was a moment, one quiet Sunday morning, when she stood on a chair beside me in the kitchen, trying to flip pancakes. The first one folded in half, the second hit the floor, and the third turned out perfect. She looked up at me with pride in her eyes and said, "See, I'm getting better." I remember smiling, realizing those words weren't just about pancakes. They were about us. I was getting better, too. Each day became a lesson in unlearning. Unlearning control, unlearning pride, unlearning the belief that success and love couldn't exist in the same room. She taught me that responsibility wasn't a burden. It was a privilege. It wasn't about providing. It was about being there. I started waking up early, not for meetings, but to make her breakfast before school. The first time she hugged me goodbye at the door, I stood there for a full minute after she left, staring at the empty hallway and realizing that joy had a sound. and it was her footsteps fading down the corridor. At night, she'd fall asleep, curled up on the couch beside me, her head resting against my shoulder as we watched old cartoons. I'd turn down the lights and just sit there, listening to her breathe, feeling time slow down in a way it never did when I was chasing success. I had spent decades building empires just to fill the silence of my own childhood, the silence of a father who'd never cared to know me. And now, with every story I read, every laugh I shared, every mess we made together, I felt like I was rewriting that history, becoming the father I never had. But the world didn't stop testing us. There were still eyes watching, investors questioning my distractions, tabloids twisting our story, people wondering what I stood to gain. Some called it guilt, others charity. None of them understood. You can't explain love to people who only believe in transactions. One day, as I tucked her in, she asked if I missed my old life, the parties, the travel, the endless meetings. I smiled and said, "No, that life was big, but this one is full." She giggled, her small hand finding mine. "Then I think you're doing it right, Dad." Hearing her say that word still felt new, like a gift I hadn't earned but refused to let go of. Every time she said it, something inside me healed a little more. Weeks turned into months. Her laughter became the rhythm of my days, her drawings the artwork of my walls, her happiness the measure of my success. I'd never known peace could be this loud, this bright, this alive. But peace, I would soon learn, is fragile, easily broken, easily taken. It was a night like any other. The city outside glowed against the windows, her soft humming drifted from the next room, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to think that maybe, just maybe, the past had finally forgiven me. And then, as I was tucking her blanket tighter around her, she looked up at me with sleepy eyes and asked, almost in a whisper, "Dad, if my mom could see us now, do you think she'd be proud?" The question hit me like a blade dipped in love and sorrow. I froze. The words caught in my throat. How could I answer that? How could I promise something I'd never earned? Her voice was soft, but her question cut deep. And in that moment, I realized how fragile happiness truly is. Even after healing, one question can still find your scars. It had been almost a year since she came into my life, and yet some nights still felt like the first. Fragile, uncertain, full of ghosts I hadn't fully laid to rest. The laughter that filled our home had become my favorite sound, and the silence between those moments had softened into comfort instead of emptiness. But even in peace, the past has a way of whispering through the quiet, reminding you that some stories never truly end. They only pause until you're strong enough to listen again. That evening, the city was quiet. A gentle rain tapped against the glass, the same rhythm that had once carried a small voice through the storm. We sat together on the couch, her head resting against my shoulder, a movie flickering softly in the background. Her handmade drawings, colorful, uneven, perfect, lined the wall beside us. The warmth of her presence had become my anchor, and for once I believed I'd done something right. Then she spoke, so softly that at first I thought I'd imagined it. "Dad," she said, "do you think Mom can see us now?" The question landed like a slow, deep ache in my chest. I looked down at her, her eyes wide, innocent, but carrying the same sadness I'd seen in Evelyn's long ago. For a moment, I couldn't find words. It was the kind of question that didn't belong to logic or theology. It belonged to the heart. And the heart, I had learned, rarely gives easy answers. I took a slow breath, forcing back the lump in my throat. "Yes," I said finally. "I think she's watching every day." She studied my face, as if weighing my words for truth. "Even when I'm bad sometimes?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. I smiled through the ache. "Especially then," I said. "She knows you're learning, she knows you're brave, and she knows we both miss her." For a long moment she was quiet. Then she nodded, leaning closer, resting her head against my arm. I felt her small fingers slip into mine, and I held on tightly, not to reassure her, but to remind myself that this, right here, was what love was supposed to feel like. The next morning she came into my office clutching one of her handmade cards. "Can we go see her?" she asked. The words froze me. It was the first time she'd said it. See her. She meant the grave. The place I'd avoided since the day I found the letter. For months, I'd told myself I wasn't ready, that it was too soon. But maybe she was right. Maybe it wasn't about being ready. Maybe it was about being brave together. So we went. The cemetery was quiet, tucked away from the rush of the city. The air smelled faintly of rain and earth. She held my hand tightly as we walked between rows of weathered stones, her small fingers squeezing mine whenever the wind brushed too hard against her hair. When we found the headstone, she stopped suddenly. Her breath caught, and I felt her hand tremble. The name engraved in stone blurred through my tears before I could even finish reading it. Evelyn Grace Carter. Beneath it, the words she'd always lived by. Love stays. I knelt beside her, my knees sinking into the damp grass. She knelt too, setting her small card down carefully against the stone. It was pink and blue, the edges uneven, the letters crooked but full of heart. On the front, she'd written, "Happy Mother's Day in Heaven." She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a small bouquet of white lilies, the same flowers she used to sell in the rain. I watched as she arranged them gently beside the card, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she didn't want to disturb the peace around us. For a long time, we didn't speak. The wind moved through the trees, carrying the soft sound of leaves brushing together. I felt her shift closer, her small hand finding mine again. "Do you think she's happy now?" she asked quietly. I nodded, though my voice trembled when I tried to speak. "I think she is. I think she's finally at peace. And I think she's proud of you. Of us." She smiled faintly through her tears. "I hope so. I told her about you, in my prayers." The words broke something open inside me. I turned my head away, pretending to look at the horizon just to hide the tears slipping down my face. I wanted to say something, anything, but nothing seemed enough, so I just let the silence speak for me. We stayed there until the light began to fade, the sky turning gold and lavender. As we stood to leave, I whispered a quiet promise beneath my breath, one Evelyn would have understood. "I'll take care of her. I swear I'll never leave again." Back in the car, she fell asleep with her head against my arm, her hand still clutching mine. The city lights flickered to life as we drove home, and for the first time since finding Evelyn's letter, I felt something close to peace. Not the hollow kind that comes from forgetting, but the real kind, the one that comes from forgiveness. When we reached home, I carried her to her room and tucked her in, her small fingers still wrapped around the corner of that handmade card. I stood there for a long time, watching her sleep, my heart steady for once. I thought that was the end of our story, the moment everything finally settled into place. But peace, like love, is fragile. It doesn't always stay still. A week later, as I was sorting through the last of Evelyn's papers for the adoption records, an envelope slipped from between two old files. It was addressed in her handwriting, the same looping, familiar script that still haunted my dreams. There was no postage, no date, only 2 words written across the front. For him. I thought I'd found every piece of her there was to find, but destiny had one more letter to deliver, and it carried her mother's voice. Some goodbyes take years to arrive, but when they do, they heal everything. It happened on a Sunday morning, the kind that feels too calm to belong to the same world that once broke you. The sunlight spilled through the windows, painting golden patches across the floor where she sat cross-legged, surrounded by a small mountain of old boxes. I had been cleaning out the storage room, the one corner of my home I hadn't touched since bringing her here. Most of the boxes had been sealed since Evelyn's death, labeled in neat handwriting that made my chest ache every time I saw it. She was humming softly, the same song Evelyn used to hum while painting. Every now and then, she'd pause, lift something from a box, an old scarf, a sketchbook, a photo, and ask me about it. Each object felt like a thread pulling us closer to the woman we'd both lost in different ways. Then, somewhere between the old photo frames and faded notebooks, she froze. "Dad," she said quietly. "What's this?" I looked up from across the room. In her hands, she held a small envelope, yellowed by time, edges soft from years of being hidden. My pulse quickened the moment I saw the handwriting. I didn't need to open it to know whose it was. Evelyn. My breath caught as she turned it over. There was no address, no postage, just my name, written in her familiar looping script. "It was inside her jewelry box," she said softly. "Do you want to open it?" I nodded, my throat tight. My hands trembled as I took it from her, the paper fragile but warm from her touch. For a long moment, I just stared at it, afraid that opening it would make it final, that hearing her voice again, even in ink, would remind me that she was truly gone. But she wasn't gone. Not really. She lived in the little girl beside me, in every smile, every heartbeat, every second chance we'd been given. I unfolded the letter carefully. The handwriting was shaky but still graceful, each word written with the same tenderness she carried through everything she did. My daughter leaned against me, her head on my arm, as I began to read. "My dearest, if you're reading this, then somehow life has given you back to us. I don't know when or how, but I've always believed you would find your way home, not because of guilt or fate, but because love has a way of finding what it's lost. I never hated you for leaving. I think part of me understood even then that you weren't running from me. You were running from yourself. I just wish you'd known that love doesn't wait for perfect people. It waits for people who try. You gave me the kind of love most people only dream about. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And real love doesn't end just because people do. If I had the chance to live it all over again, even knowing how it ends, I'd still choose you. Our daughter is the best part of both of us. She has your stubbornness and my heart, and I know that wherever life takes her, she'll never be alone as long as she remembers where she came from. If you've found her, thank you. Thank you for being brave enough to see what matters, even if it took you a lifetime to realize it. Don't waste another day building walls around what's left of your heart. Let her in. Let her teach you how to love the world again. And please, forgive yourself. I already have. With all my love, forever and always, Evelyn. By the time I reached the last line, my voice was gone. The room blurred through the tears I'd fought so long to control. My daughter wrapped her arms around me, her tiny frame shaking against mine. "She really loved you," she whispered, her voice breaking. I nodded, unable to speak, and I never stopped loving her. We sat like that for a long time, two souls piecing together the fragments of a story that had finally come full circle. Her small hands held the letter as carefully as I had, as if afraid it might dissolve into air if she breathed too hard. "She wanted us to be happy," she said after a while. "She did," I whispered, "and I think we finally are." We spent the rest of the afternoon reading through Evelyn's old journals, her sketches, the life she left behind. Each page felt like a conversation between past and present, a bridge built out of words and memory. My daughter asked questions: what Evelyn liked to eat, what made her laugh, whether she ever sang out of tune. I answered everyone, even when my voice shook. Later that evening, I found her sitting by the window, holding the letter against her chest. The sunset had turned the sky a soft, burning gold, the kind of color Evelyn used to say looked like forgiveness. "Dad," she said, her voice small but steady, "do you think she knows we found this?" I smiled, though my eyes still burned. "I think she's the one who made sure we did." She nodded, satisfied, then leaned her head against my shoulder. The silence that followed wasn't heavy anymore. It was full, peaceful. I looked around the room. The clutter of papers, the open boxes, the photographs scattered across the table, and I realized something I'd spent a lifetime avoiding. Success had never been about what I'd built. It was about what I'd been willing to rebuild. Money had built my walls. Love had torn them down. All the wealth, the power, the reputation, none of it could compare to the simple, quiet joy of this moment. The sound of my daughter breathing beside me. The memory of Evelyn's voice echoing through her letter. The sense that maybe, just maybe, I had finally made peace with the man I had been. When I tucked her into bed that night, she asked if I would read the letter again in the morning. "I like hearing her words," she said. "It feels like she's here." "She is," I told her. "She always will be." After she fell asleep, I went back to my study and placed the letter in a frame beside the photograph of Evelyn. I looked at it for a long time, the last light of the day fading behind the city skyline. For the first time in years, I didn't feel haunted. I felt whole, because Evelyn hadn't left me with regret. She'd left me with purpose, a second chance. A daughter who reminded me every day that redemption doesn't erase the past. It redeems it. I closed my eyes and whispered into the stillness, hoping she could somehow hear it. "You were right. Love stays." She asked me to be her mom for one day, but she gave me a lifetime of love. If this story touched your heart, don't let it end here. Hit subscribe so you never miss another story that reminds us what love and second chances truly mean. Drop a comment below. What would you have done if you were in his place? And if you believe love always finds its way back, share this video, because someone out there needs this reminder today.